Hello and welcome to episode 8 of the Fierce Fatty podcast. I'm your host, Victoria Welsby, and in this episode we're talking about size privilege.
Perfect.
You're listening to the Fierce Fatty podcast. I'm Victoria Welsby, TEDx speaker, best-selling author and fat activist. I have transformed my life from hating my body with desperately low self-esteem to being a courageous and confident fierce fatty who loves every inch of this jelly. Society teaches us living in a fat body is bad, but what if we spent less time, money and energy on the pursuit of thinness and instead focused on the things that actually matter, like if pineapple on pizza should be outlawed, or if the mullet was the greatest haircut of the 20th century. So, how do you stop negative beliefs about your fat body controlling your life? It's the Fierce Fatty podcast. Let's begin. A lot of people get angry about this topic, and the reason most of the time is that they don't understand what thin privilege is, and then when they're told that maybe they have thin privilege, people say, but I don't because I don't like my body, and it's not what thin privilege is. So in this episode, I want to explain exactly what is size privilege or thin privilege and see whether I have it, whether you have it. Why do we need to be aware about this thing anyway? And big surprise, if you do have privilege, any type of privilege, guess what? That doesn't mean that you're a bad person. No, it's just something about you as a person. It's neither good or bad. It just is, the same way that if you have, blonde hair or black hair or whatever, it's just a part of you as a person, but it makes things different in the way that you go about life. Now, before we get more into that, I want to let you know that if you do me a massive favor and leave a review for the podcast, leave a nice review, something like, oh, Victoria's amazing, she's so sexually attractive, whatever you want. Leave me a review. And before you do, take a screenshot and then send that to me, my email, victoria@fiercefatty.com. And as a thank you, I'm going to send you a copy of my best-selling book called Fierce Fatty, How to Love Your Body and Live Like the Queen You Already Are. I'm going to send you a digital and an audio copy so you can listen to it, or you can just go ahead and straight read it on your computer, on your phone, whatever you like. So as a thank you, I want to give that to you for leaving a review. And as another thank you, if you share that you are listening to this episode on social media and make sure that you tag me, I'm going to put you in to win, in a draw to win a Fierce Fatty cup that you would drink hot liquid from. So like a cup or mug. But mug, you think mug is bigger, right? A cup is like what you'd have a cup of tea in, or a cup of coffee or something. And it says Fierce Fatty. It's amazing. You can't get it anywhere else. You can't buy it. So share on social media and I'll put you in a draw to win one of those mugs. So, size privilege. Oh my God. I realized I was listening back to the last episode of the podcast, just to listen back and make sure that things make sense and yada, yada, yada. And I fell asleep to the episode. But I do this all the time, is I listen to podcasts, not my own podcasts, because that kind of sounds narcissistic, but I listen to podcasts to fall asleep to. Do you do that? But they have to be specific type of podcasts. They have to be quieter podcasts. It can't be ones where people are laughing and having a good time and, where there's spikes in the volume. And I realized that Fierce Fatty podcast is not a falling asleep to podcast, because there's bits where I make weird noises or do a shouty bit. And I fell asleep listening to the podcast and then was rudely awoken by myself being like, "Whoa!" saying something. So I'm sorry if you're trying to fall asleep listening to this podcast, because it's probably not going to work for you. At some point I might be like, "Blah," and then you'll be like, "Holy fucking shit, what was that noise?" and you'll wake up. So yeah, maybe this is a daytime podcast, or maybe it's not. Maybe it's just me that listens to podcasts to fall asleep to. Normally crime podcasts. There's something wrong with me. What's wrong with me? Oh my God. Yeah. Anyway, something I wanted to mention is in the last episode, I said something and I was like, "Oh, that's not what I meant." Something, just a quick side note. I said about two lines that I said in the show, in the BBC show that I was in. This is what last podcast episode was about. That I said, "I don't believe in health." And then I said health is binary, but I didn't say that. I said health is a social construct. So when I was listening to that and falling asleep, I was like, no, health isn't binary. That's not what I said. So just a side note, correction on that for last episode is I said health is a social construct. I don't believe in health. It's a social construct. And in that, I was talking about the fact that the way that we view bodies, fat bodies or health is very black and white, when in fact it's actually shades of grey and quite complicated. So no, side note. All right, so this episode is titled, "What the heck is thin privilege and do you have it?" Now I'm using the phrase thin privilege because that's the most common way to describe this topic that we're talking about. But I think the word thin privilege is a little bit alienating for some people, because if you ask the general population, do you identify with the word thin? Like, do you have a thin body? Even those who do have a smaller body or even very small bodies would not necessarily classify themselves as thin. They'd be like, "Well, no, I'm just, maybe I'm a little bit chubby here, maybe," because the way that we see thin is a very, very, very small person. But a lot of times fat people class what is thin as someone who is just not fat. And so that could be someone who is chubby, but not actually fat. And so I want to use the words more of size privilege, because even if you are fat, you still can have more privilege in your body than someone who is bigger. So sometimes I might say thin privilege, but I really want to get out of using thin privilege and say size privilege, because I think it's more approachable and more understandable. So the reason why I wanted to talk about this is in the BBC show that I was in, there's a scene that you see where I've got a lot of messages about this. People being like, why don't people understand what privilege is? Oh my God. But there's a scene at the table, and I don't know how we got onto it, but we're talking about privilege. And I said, I am a small, medium fat person. Therefore, my body is more privileged than people whose bodies are bigger than me. And Sarah took offense to this, and she was like, "What do you mean? Like, you can't say that your body is better." And I said, "No, it's not that my body is better. It's just that I'm less marginalized." And I said something like, life is just easier for me because I'm less discriminated against and all that sort of jazz. And it's important to recognize that bigger bodies need to be lifted up. I said something like that. Can't remember the exact words, but that was the gist. And then it cuts away to later to Sarah, and she says something like, "I can't believe Victoria is so egotistical that she thinks her body is better than others." And at that point I was like, "No, that's not what it means. That's not what privilege is." And I, being in my bubble of forward-thinking people who are interested in social justice, I presume that everyone knows about this thing called privilege. Whereas, and especially someone like Sarah, who works for a charity trying to help fat people, I just presumed that it was just a normal kind of conversation. And that was ignorance on my part, because not everyone is into this stuff or knowing about this stuff. You know, it's not necessarily a common phrase in popular society. You might hear, you know, male privilege, and even male privilege, some people are like, well, that's not true, there's no such thing, and women get all the privilege because they can bat their eyes and get loads of things and things like that. So we're still a society struggling with the idea that there is a thing called male privilege. And so when you get into something like thin privilege or size privilege, people are just like, no fucking way. What is this bitch talking about? So I want to break it down to make it super understandable and take the kind of anxiety out of it. Because if someone says you've got privilege, a lot of people feel defensive. And rightly so, right? You know, because sometimes when we hear that you have privilege, sometimes you hear your life is easy. Your life is rainbows and unicorns, money raining down from the sky, you poop glitter, your piss is rubies. That sounds uncomfortable, but you know what I mean. That your life is easy. And so then people who have privilege say, no, my life is not easy. And so what privilege is saying that your life is not harder because of this certain characteristic that you have or don't have. And it doesn't mean that you are a bad person because you have privilege. Now, sometimes people who have privilege, a lot of the time people who have privilege, use that privilege for their own gain, and they don't want to dismantle the systems that gave them that privilege, because it means that they are going to lose the thing that makes their life maybe a little bit easier. So I want to give an example. So I mentioned before that I'm a small, medium fat. Now, I don't know if I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but I know that I haven't gone in depth on it, that there is such a thing called like the fat spectrum or the fat scale. This is something that Ash from the Fat Lip podcast created. So the idea about there being different sizes of fat people has been established in fat activism. And more recently, Ash has created this kind of very simple guide. And it's not the kind of be all and end all of who is fat and who isn't fat, and if are you this size or that size or whatever. It's just a guide to give you an idea of how much privilege you have. And it's focused towards women, because it's women's sizes. And so it's hard to kind of put men on this scale or any other genders who don't wear women's clothing. So that's something to note. So this is the fat scale. And by the way that I define fat is, have you experienced oppression or stigma because of the size of your body? And so that's not just, someone saying, oh, you're fat, and actually you're not fat. It is systematic. And so, for example, you go into a clothes store and they don't have anything that you can wear. There's not any sizes. You sit down in a seat and it's too small. You get overlooked for a promotion because your boss thinks, that fat person is obviously greedy and lazy. Things like that. So have you experienced oppression because of the size of your body? Then you're probably fat. Now, we all experience oppression because of the sexist society that we live in, and even thin people do, but it's a very specific, because of the size of your body is seen as a negative, and it's based in fat phobia. So that's just my definition of what is fat and who is fat. But this is the fat scale. So a small fat person is classed as a US size 18 and lower. So that for UK size is a UK size 20 and lower. And that is also a XL or 2X in clothing. And so a size 18 US or 20 UK size and lower. And so if you were a small fat in the clothing world, you would be able to find clothes that fit in mainstream brands. And you would have lots of choices. And so you'd be able to go into most high street stores and they would carry your size, right? So they wouldn't stop at size 14, they would go to size 18. Now that might be the very top end of what they carry, but you can still walk into most high street stores and find something, right? So that's a small fat. A medium fat person is a size 20 to 24 US, and UK that's 22 to 24. 22 to 26, sorry. Typo in my writing. And that is a 2X and a 3X. So if you are a medium fat, you can shop at some mainstream brands, but mostly plus brands and online. So that's my reality, is that if I go into the city centre here, so I'm currently in Ireland, and if I go into Derry, there is one store that I can shop at, and that is Primark. They carry a size 20 in Primark, but 20, I don't always fit into a size 20 because I'm a size 20, 22. And so I can shop in Primark, and there is one plus size brand store in Derry, but it's like not fashion forward. And so I've been in there a couple of times and I've been like, nope, not for me, thank you. But still, there is theoretically a whole store that I could shop at if I did choose to wear that plus size brand. And I can go into Primark to get some size 20s in there. But most of the stuff that I buy is online because I can't rely on Primark to, you know what stores are like. Sometimes you'll pick up a one size and it'll be like 57 inches smaller than the other size of, in a different clothing piece. So it's hit and miss. So that's medium fat. A super fat person is US size 26 to 32. And so that's a UK size 28 to 34. And that is size 4X and 5X. So as a super fat, you would wear the highest sizes of plus sizes. So in plus size brands, so that store in Derry that has the plus sizes, they're at very highest sizes as they carry. And you can mostly only shop online, because there's no choices really. So imagine if I didn't have Primark and I only had that one store in Derry, which I didn't find fashion forward, but that was my only choice. I would have to shop there. And I wouldn't always get stuff in there because the sizes maybe don't go up to a 4 or 5X, and if they do, maybe they don't have them, etc., etc. And then finally, we have infini-fat, also known in the fat community as a death fat. Now, this is a tongue-in-cheek, so don't be like, oh my God, death fat? Oh my God, infini-fat is a tongue-in-cheek. So the death fat is, people from the outside, the hand wringers and hair pullers would be like, oh my God, that person's so fat, they're about to die. How can they even be alive? They're that fat. And that fat person is just like, I'm just here. I ain't dead yet, So it's a kind of a tongue in the cheek thing. And so an infini-fat is someone who is a size 35 US or higher. So that's size 36 in the UK and 6X and higher. So as an infini-fat, it's very hard to find anything that fits. And at anywhere online, there's no way you can go into the high street and find something. And often you require custom sizing and having clothes made, or you having to make your own clothes. And so that is the infini-fat or death fat. So the reason why it's important for us to recognize that there are different levels of fatness is not to, categorize ourselves or to say a smaller fat is better than a medium fat, or an infini fat is better than a super fat, or whatever. It's just to recognize that each person, no matter wherever they fall on the spectrum, will have different experiences in life. And to recognize that my life is just that little bit easier because I am a small medium fat than someone who is a super or an infini fat. Now, an example of this. A few years ago, I went to the local fair, and there was a big hyped new ride. And I love the fair. I love scary rides, and I'm a bit of a daredevil sort of thing. And I went with my then ex-boyfriend, still my ex-boyfriend, but he was kind of like newly ex-boyfriend, so we were still kind of hanging out and stuff. And we went on the rides, and we eventually we lined up, we queued for this one ride. I think it was called the Beast, and it was like would spin you up, spin you from side to side in a circle. And we were waiting, and loads of teenagers in the line, and we waited maybe 20-30 minutes to get on the ride. And so then we got on the ride, and we were the last two riders, and so we were split up, and I got into my seat, and I pulled down the harness thing. Not a harness, but more secure than a harness, and it wouldn't quite close, but I thought, oh, you know what, they'll come over and they'll push it in and it'll click. And so the person came over to try and push it in for it to click, and it wasn't working. And I was like, well, it will. This person's probably just weak, And so they called over someone else, and someone else came and was like, oh, maybe take your coat off. And I was wearing this really thin jacket. Like, this jacket was, as thick as a t-shirt. So I was thinking, that's not going to work, but I'll give it a try. And so by this time, this is maybe 2 minutes have gone by, where the riders are starting to look around, are like, what's the delay? And all of the teenagers are there watching. And I take my jacket off, put it on the side, sit back in, and then two people come and start trying to push the thing in. And eventually they say, sorry, it's not fitting. You're going to have to get off the ride. So I got off the ride. And now, luckily, I was fat positive at the time. And my experience of that was, oh, that sucks that they don't make rides for people who are only slightly larger than the average sized person. When I say average, I mean that most people are now plus size. Most women are. And so we carried on, and my ex-boyfriend was like, that sucked. And I was like, yeah, that sucked. Carried on, went on a different ride, blah, 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 went home. The fact that I could go on any ride at all was size privilege. I had size privilege, that I could get through the turnstiles, that I could sit on any ride, and only one of the rides that I tried to go on in that fairground didn't fit me. Only one. Okay, so I was excluded because of my size from one ride. And my ex-boyfriend said it wasn't that good anyway. I don't know if he was probably just trying to be nice. But so someone smaller than me in that moment, so my ex-boyfriend, who was a smaller guy, he had size privilege because he was able to get on that ride. That ride was made to fit someone of his body size. But I then had size privilege when I went on the old wooden roller coaster, that someone who was bigger might not have been able to fit. Maybe someone who is bigger would never even go to the fair because they just knew it would just be full of disappointment. So imagine that. Like, say if you're a thrill seeker and you love going on rides, that you could never have done something because of your size. And so that's just one example. Other things could be because of my size, it is easier for me to find someone to go on a date with than someone who is bigger. So someone who is bigger, they experience more discrimination, and they will experience potential partners who say, oh, I'm not dating someone of that size. My size, I will have more people who are likely to say, I will date someone of her size. But still, there will be even more people who will date someone who is straight-sized. So I have privilege, but also I don't have as much privilege as someone who is smaller than me. And other examples are, it's probably easier for me, I know it's easier for me to get a job than it is for someone who is bigger than me. I used to work in recruitment. For 10 years, I was in recruitment. I would see size discrimination at work. I remember very clearly a woman coming in for an interview with us and in the recruitment firm. And I'd say they were a super fat, maybe an infini fat, noticeably fat. And I remember seeing her walk by, and then not that long later, her walking and leaving. And then my colleague who interviewed her coming in and being like, did you see her? Oh my God. Well, I can't present that to the client, can I? Because we would get clients, candidates. And I remember saying like, oh, didn't they have the experience? And he was like, no, like she's so fat, she's so big. And it didn't matter what was on her resume. He totally dismissed her because of her size. She was seen as unprofessional or slovenly or lazy or all the other things that fat people are seen as. And some people who are fatter are seen as more aggressively so. And as well, think about going to the doctor. If you are a smaller bodied person, if you go in and you say, oh, I have a sore knee, or any other ailment that you might have, the doctor will say, interesting. I wonder why. And are more likely to treat you like you're a normal human being. When a fat person goes in, so say me, I actually damaged my knee skiing. I tore my MCL and my meniscus skiing. I had a skiing accident. And I remember the doctors saying like, oh, are you active? And as in like, should we fix your knee? Like, is this going to be a big problem for you? And I was like, yeah, I am quite active. I think at the time I ran, running, cycling, swimming, all that type of stuff. And they were like, oh, okay. And they made a decision to fix my knee. I don't know whether if I said I don't do anything, whether they wouldn't have, but that was my perception. Now, if a very fat person had the same problem, tore their ACL and their meniscus in their knee, would they have been given the same opportunity to have surgery? Would they have had that ACL repaired? Or would they have been even asked, are you active? Would the doctor just have presumed, well, clearly they're not active because look at the size of them? Would they have been blamed on having a sore knee because of their weight? More likely so, right? Versus someone who is smaller. So just to reiterate, if you have privilege, it doesn't mean that your life is rainbows and fairy tales. It just means that your life is not harder because you have this certain level of privilege. Now, we all have so many different parts of our identity. So you might have privilege in your body size. So you might have size privilege, but you might be lacking privilege in other areas. So you might be a small person, but you might be a person of color. You might be a small person, but you might be trans or non-binary or queer or disabled or any other identity which is marginalized. And so even if you have one identity which is privileged, it doesn't mean you don't also have other identities which are marginalized, right? And so it's complicated, human beings are complicated. It's not black and white of you have privilege, therefore your life is amazing, you lucky bastard. I wish that I was you, right? So I have lots of privilege. I am white. I was born in the UK, although I grew up in poverty and was homeless at 17, I had the education that the UK provided me. I managed to get a degree paid for by the UK because that's what the UK do for poor people. And I was able to continue my education and then make something of myself. I am also cisgendered. I am straight. I am able bodied. I am currently lower middle class. I When I went to Canada, the privilege that I experienced there was so interesting. People presuming because I'm British, so British people are seen as, in North America, seen as smart or something or posh. And I remember my first boss being like, "Oh, you're gonna make so much money here in the recruitment industry because of where you're from, your accent." And I was like, "What?" And I saw it time and again, people presuming that I was rich and smart and educated and lots of positive things because of where I was from. And, I wasn't going to tell him, like, "No, motherfucker, like, I am from a council estate. I am rough as they come." But that was, really plain as day for me to see. I was getting all of these things and I was getting people to like me quicker and trust me quicker and presume positive things about me because of a characteristic of me. There was nothing that I did. I happened to be born in a country. I didn't choose that, right? And so I didn't do anything to get that. But also, I'm not bad because I have that. You're not bad because you have any type of privilege that you do have. You're not bad if you don't have privilege. You're not bad if you are marginalized. It's just a part of our identity. What is bad is if you recognize you have privilege and you're like, rubbing your hands together and you're like, "Right, motherfucker, I'm gonna milk this. I'm gonna really make sure that I stay on top and that I don't challenge status quo, that I don't want to rock the boat, because if I rock the boat, then I might be taken off my perch." Now, a good example of this is rich old white men. Now, rich old white men, they rule the world and they don't want things to change because if they're at the top, if things change, what's going to happen? Maybe they'll become number two. Not likely to happen, but they basically don't want to experience the things that marginalized people experience, because it makes life just a little bit harder. And in a lot of cases, a lot harder, depending on your wealth level and status and all that sort of stuff. So you have privilege, right? It's just part of who you are. Doesn't make you bad. But what are you going to do about it, right? Are you going to use your privilege for good or for bad? You have this power. Are you going to continue to oppress others? And I benefit from the oppression of others. Like, I benefit as a white person from white supremacy. I benefit from people hating very, very fat people. I benefit. On the surface, I could say, "No, I don't. I don't like that. I'm liberal. I'm forward thinking," but still I benefit from it because the systems in place have made it so that, white people get ahead, that straight people get ahead more easily than those who are, have different types of identity. So how can you use your size privilege for good? Well, there's lots of different ways. So something that I do in my business is whenever I have a project, say if someone has invited me to, "Hey, come on this," for example, a panel of speakers about a certain topic, I will always ask them, who are the other speakers? If it is just a bunch of white women, able-bodied, straight, people who don't have marginalized identities, then I will say, "No thanks, I'd rather you add a more diverse group of people." I don't want to take the space of someone who is more, who has less privilege than me in this discussion. Very often I've seen, panels, and it'll be like, or summits and things like that. And I'll look at the other speakers and I'm like, thin white woman, thin white woman, thin white woman, thin white woman. What? Where are all the fatties? Where are the people of color? Where are the disabled people? Where are queer people and, the trans people? And I will say this to them. I'll say, hey, no, but I do know some people who might be a good fit. And a lot of the times they're like, what? How dare you? When I say, hey, no, because I'm just going to be another white person added to the mix. And so whenever I do things where I am putting things together, I make sure that there is a diversity of size and identities. And so the last time I did something, it was called the Fierce Fatty Summit. I think I did something last year. And that was top priority for me. And a lot of people say, but it's so hard to find people who are not white, who are not straight, who are not thin. And I call bullshit on that. You might know a lot of straight, white, thin women because it's easier for them to be elevated, right? And so it might be harder to find a lot of people. I say harder in quotes because of systematic oppression, right? But they're there. They are so there. You just might have to do a tiny little bit of digging, like of digging. Yeah. So you have privilege. I don't know what type of privilege. Maybe it's size privilege. Maybe it's something else. But again, you're not a bad person. You are if you're a complete dick about it, and you don't want to dismantle the systems that uphold that the marginalization of others. Yeah. So that is privilege. Hopefully I've covered it all. Hopefully I've made it accessible and easy to understand and not confusing. And I wanted to make this episode because moving forward in the podcast, I'm going to be talking about privilege and things like that. And I just want it to be like, I want there to be an episode so we lay out what size privilege is. And so we're talking the same language sort of thing. Now I'm going to link Ash from the Fat Lip and that fatness spectrum in the show notes, so go check it out. You can find the show notes linked below depending on where you are, but if you just want to go straight there, it's fiercefatty.com/008, because episode 8 again, that is fiercefatty.com/008. I should say like www.fiercefatty. You know. Do you remember in the when the internet first came out? I was going to say in the olden days, when I was a kid, when I was young, when on TV they'd be like http://www, to do the web address, and it'd be like 75,000 characters long, and you'd be like, ooh, so futuristic. Yeah. So, a little fact for you for today. I mentioned before that I had an ex-boyfriend. Yes, one time I dated someone. But I am currently single and ready to mingle. I've been single for about, oh my God, maybe 2 or 3 years. Yeah, maybe 3. Holy shit. Too long. Not really, not too long. It's the longest I've been single, actually. My last boyfriend, that guy that I mentioned, I was with him for 6 years. And so the last time I dated before that was quite a while. And my dating experiences have been interesting. Because the last time that I dated, I had low self-esteem. And so, someone sent me a text saying, show us your tits. I'd be like, oh my God, I think I found my boyfriend. I think he loves me. He wants to see my tits. Of course you can see my tits. Oh, want to see my asshole too? Yes. Oh my God. Yeah, so it was easy for me to date when I had low self-esteem because, anyone who would even just be like, oi, fucking show us your rat. I'd be like, oh my God, he's so romantic. Oh my God. And now I don't have time for anyone's bullshit. And I've been in Ireland for God, I sound so Canadian when I say that. I've been in Ireland since maybe 10 months, 9 months now, and I've had one date. I lie, two dates with one guy, and he turned out to be, oh my God, he turned out to be a complete bell end. So we had the first date, and we've been chatting back and forth and stuff. And on my profile, at the end of it, I say I only date fellow feminists. And so that really screens out a lot of people who are like, oh, feminist. And so on our second date, so first date, we went and got some dinner or whatever. And our second date, I brought up the subject of, oh, so you're a feminist then? And he was like, feminist? What does that mean? Like, men can't be feminists. I mean, I'm not feminine. And I was just like, oh my God, here we go. And I was like, has this motherfucker not even read my profile? Like, my profile's not that long. And this thing was in capitals. Like, I only date fellow feminists. And like, was it, what? Like, what? And he was like, yeah, no, men can't be feminine. And I'm just like, no, that's not what feminism is. And and then I was like, it means that you believe that men and women should be treated equally, have the access to the same opportunities, and blah blah blah. And with that definition, most normal human beings are feminists, right? And he was like, well, women have got all the same rights as men. And I was like, nope. And he was just like, and he just went off. We just went off on one. He just started ranting and raving. And then get this. He said this to me. And he's like, well, I've been a victim of sexism. Of course he has. By the way, men can't experience sexism because it's about power. Men have the power, so they cannot be victims of sexism. So he's like, I've been a victim of sexism. What do you think about this situation? Hear this situation, and you are gonna be your mind is gonna be changed. And I was like, okay, tell us about this situation where you've experienced sexism. And he said, one time I was training this group of people at work, and I was like, yeah, and I was looking at the tits and bum of one of the people in the class. And I was like, yeah. And then he said, afterwards, the friend of that person made a complaint about me. And I got told off. Now, if that isn't sexism, I don't know what is. And I was speechless. I was like, what? And he's like, because they don't know that men can't help looking at a woman's tits and bum. It's not my fault that she had her tits and bum there and I was looking at it. She probably wanted to have a date with me and I didn't even go on a date with her. And that's probably why they complained about me. I was just like, oh my, who is this human being? What? And so, yeah, I was just like, yep. Time for me to go. So that was my experience in Ireland. I've not been that bothered about dating really. And a lot of the times you just get a bit tired of it, because every time you start up a conversation and you're like having a bit of banter and then they're like, show us your tits. And you're like, oh, for fuck's sake. Or, hey, how you doing? And then they're like, oh, I'm really horny today. I've got such a massive hard on. And you're like, really? What? You would be so more likely to get laid if you just behaved like a normal human being and then went on a date with me and behaved like a normal human being, and maybe then we'd have sex. But you with all of these fucking, asking for tit pics and sending me dick pics, like it's not working out in your favour, mate. So that is my fact about me. I'm single. Anyone want to date me? I'm pretty awesome. Anyone want any leads on normal human beings for me to date? Then let me know. So reminder, leave a review for me. And before you submit the review on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher, take a screenshot. Because you know what? I've had a good number of reviews, but only a few are showing up. Because what happens is you submit it, and then 75 years later, it's approved and put onto the podcast page. And so if you wait for it to come up and show on the podcast page, you might be waiting until you die. So take a screenshot before you submit it, and then just email me, victoria@fiercefatty.com. I'll send you a e-book version and an audiobook version of my book. Share on social media that you're listening to the podcast, and I'll put you in the draw to win a Fierce Fatty mug/cup for drinking hot liquid or cold. Go wild. Drink cold liquid from it, you wild cold liquid drinking person, you. And thanks for hanging out with me today on this episode of the Fierce Fatty podcast. I can't wait to see you again on another episode. Have a wonderful day, my Fierce Fatty. And keep being amazing.